Right.
I make assumptions that the reason why you're asked is because of the color of your skin. And it's an assumption.
Yeah.
It is an assumption, right? It's like, well.
Is the thought of being imperfect keeping you from taking action? Welcome to Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans. Each week, we give you real-life stories and thought-provoking research that inspires your soul to live a more fulfilled life through your own actions. From the heart of Calgary, Canada, here are your hosts, award-winning coaches, Christopher Lawrence and Kyle Kalu.
Kyle Kalu.
Christopher Lawrence.
Coach Kyle, what are we talking about today?
Actually, it's about assumptions. I want to get into assumptions, if that's okay. And it's not that okay, let me back up. Oftentimes people tell you don't make assumptions, right? You shouldn't make assumptions. And it's not that you shouldn't make assumptions. It's more around you need to check your assumptions. And I got an interesting story. So let's just do this.
Oh, I love a story.
Okay. So as you know, we're in the parquet. We have a parquet in our building, right? So we drive in, and I think this happens for most people. I'm not sure how everyone else's parquet got set up, but you have to fob in. Now, usually, you hit the fob, the garage door opens, you go down and you do your parking. However, this one time, this guy someone was in front of me. And so he goes in and, I follow him, right? So I think that's called tailgating, right? So I followed him in instead of waiting for it to close, even though there's a sign that says you should and then you wait. I don't know who else is doing that, but I went in, right? So fair enough. He parked. I go down to my parking spot and what have you. So he comes down one level because you could walk down. He comes to one level and he says, hello, can you prove to me that you're supposed to park there? Now, you know me. Of course, I had to filter what I wanted to respond to him with. And I just said, actually, are you with the property management company? Are you on the board? Are you part of the company? Or, because I said, why are you asking me to prove that I could park here, right? I think there's other ways you could go about it, but we're going to talk about that in a second. But he just says, can you park? I said, oh, sure. If I can prove that I'm supposed to park here, can you also prove to me that you're supposed to park in here?
See, that is interesting, right? Because it's like people do tailgate us into buildings. It happens, apartment buildings, parking lots, whatever, when they're secured. And so we're told by, landlords and owners and everything else to check, right? Like we are told to do that check. And so it is kind of a thing. His language was a bit funny though, right? Like, can you prove to me that you're supposed to park there? Like maybe I would have made a different fob.
Yeah, why didn't you just ask me for the fob? Why didn't you just say, hey, I just want to double check? Because we're a little bit of a sketchy area in the sense that people are sketchy around the area, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's actually a pretty good area, but there is a lot of kind of, but I also know how you dress, right? So it's like, I know what kind of vehicle you have. It's very nice. It's brand new. I know how you dress. You're always dressed to the nines. And to be fair, this was in the morning in an office building, in a professional office building.
Okay, I don't get it. What does that have to do with anything?
Well, I think what I'm saying is like, if you were going to make like if he was going to make an assumption, like a concerned assumption that you weren't supposed to park there.
Right.
Then
because I kind of look like I belong, is what you're saying.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. But again, like this is the challenge with not checking your assumptions.
Mm-hmm. No, here's the thing. We will always have assumptions, and we get that. And when I look back at it, in my years of leadership and working with some plethora of different style of personality and people, sometimes what we meant to say is not what we end up saying, right? And so there's other things that kind of comes in, and we know how in our line of work and the things that we've done, how that could really go off, right? Someone could really be set up, and that conversation could have simply gone. Now, I could have said to him, right? So let me own my piece first. I could have said to him, I'm actually curious why you're asking me to prove why I'm supposed to park here. Is it because you're questioning if I should be in the building or not? Can I show you that I also have the same fob as you do to enter this parquet?
See, so this is right. So this is the thing, right? Because I know that that happened to you less than a week before. You tailgated somebody else into the building.
Right.
And someone came, but the way they asked you was they said, "Hey, do you mind showing me your fob? I just need to check because we're supposed to." Whereas this other guy, I think you had, when you had told me about the story originally, there was some tone. It was the way he asked, "Can you prove that you're supposed to park there?" And then I also remember you saying, "Well, sure, if you can prove that you work here or that you're supposed to park there," right? Like it was, and so your response, actually, your immediate response was defensive. It's interesting, Kyle. So I talked to Catherine, who works in this building as well when it's not COVID and all that kind of thing. And so I asked her this morning in preparation for this podcast, "Catherine, how many times have you tailgated somebody into the parking lot?" And she's like, "Since we started working here?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, I don't know, like lots." And I'm like, "Yeah, me too." I said, "How many times has somebody come and asked you if you work in the building?" She's like, "Never." And I'm like, "Yeah, I tailgate, probably, at least once a month. There's somebody in front of me and I don't even bother pulling my fob out and I just kind of tailgate them in. And I'm prepared. If somebody asks, I'm prepared to say like, 'Hey, here's my fob.'" But it is funny to me how many like it's happened to you more than twice, but twice recently. And it is funny to me how many times you have been asked to prove that you're supposed to be in this building. And so I make assumptions because of where we are in our planet right now.
Right.
I make assumptions that the reason why you're asked is because of the color of your skin. And it's an assumption.
Yeah.
It is an assumption, right? It's like, well, like, why are they asking you? Like, why you? Like you are dressed so like sometimes I come in looking like a schlep, like especially on a Friday or something, right? I'm like wearing jeans and like t-shirts and like ball caps, right? And it's like I might not even bother trimming my beard, whatever. And I've never been asked if I'm supposed to be in this building. I've had people let me into the parkade without checking. Right. And I know how you dress, like you're always to the nines. Right. And it comes from your professional background of, working in companies and professions for, somewhere between 40 and 50 years.
That's an interesting assumption, though. It's interesting. There's a lot of assumptions that's happening, right? And I think that's a different conversation, I think, Christopher, we could have, because to be honest, my assumption wasn't there where you went with it, only because there's many occurrences in my life where I'm just used to it. If I had to think about all of those things all the time, it's usually other people who mention that to me, because they'll say exactly what you said, right? They're like, "That has never happened to me."
Do you think that his tone betrayed him? So, we're talking about checking your assumptions. Like, I know when I have asked other people, because I will ask, like, if I see someone coming in the building, I don't recognize them, I'm probably going to ask, condo buildings, business buildings. We know that we've had a couple of break-ins in this building since we moved in, only a couple, whereas other buildings in the area maybe have had more. We're in the Beltline in Calgary, right? So I'm curious, like I know when I've asked, if I'm afraid, sometimes my tone betrays me and I say the wrong thing. Like, I know I'm supposed to ask, but I'll say the wrong thing.
Right.
It's like, and so I'm curious,
what? What would you have said?
Well, I might have said, "Can you prove that you're supposed to park there?" And so I'm curious, like, did you make an assumption that he was challenging you versus actually maybe he was a little bit nervous to ask, but trying to do the right thing?
Yeah, that's great. My first response was, "F you." Like, what do you mean I can prove? Because it didn't sound even right. Like, even if he answered that question, says, "Yeah, actually I am, I own the building," right? I would have still had an issue with how he asked it. Right. So, but I was just like, prove it. Like, do you walk? Because that's exactly what I went with it. I'm like, do you walk around with your landlord tenant agreement and lease agreements and say, "Oh yeah, here you go. Here's a parking spot. Here's my vehicle in the said spot"? Like, no one walks around with that. It's like someone going to someone when they say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, that is our company policy," and they say, "Prove it. Show me the company policy."
Right.
Where's that written? There's not written
You know,
anywhere, right?
I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, I think I would have made similar assumptions to you as well,
Mhm.
right? Like, I think just based off of how he maybe asked and approached it, I might have felt defensive. And then I think about this, and I think, well, like, what was his original assumption? That's my first question, right?
Mhm.
And then I guess my second assumption is, like, was there an or I guess like my question for you is there an expectation that people are always going to ask the right way? Like, because I think we hear people's
point.
words. Like, I look at this, and this is a totally different episode. We have gotten stuck on labels
Mhm.
in this society. We use things like white privilege and white fragility, and so there's an assumption that because we're white, we have fragility or we have privilege. And yes, that is true in so many cases. But Kyle, you and I have talked about this, and we know how I grew up, and it's like, girl, I have been discriminated against for the color of my skin. I have had somebody
Yeah.
scream out their car because of the color of my skin because of where I grew up and that kind of thing. And so it's like I'm like reading all this stuff, and I'm like, what? Like, I don't like,
Yeah.
I don't understand this. But I think the problem is that we actually get stuck on the labels.
Mhm.
And so if we stop using labels and we just focus on data, then we're dealing with the real issue. There is an issue with people of color in terms of equality
Right.
and racism and everything else. That's the issue, but we're stuck on the labels. And so I think about this in this case with this guy, and I, not to belabor the point here, but I wonder, is there an assumption that he should have said it the right way? When maybe he was completely unskilled at it. Like, if you knew that he was terrified, but trying to do the right thing, would you have changed how you responded to him?
Yes, I probably would have, but you just actually said something that I'm thinking. Here's the thing: when we come back to control around self, and you and I do a lot of work in this space, with our clients and when we speak at these different events. And here's the thing: could he have said it the right way, yay or nay? Again, yes, no, don't know, could have, should have. But I think what is consistent is who we are as individuals. Like, if I'm a person, I have an opportunity to disarm, dismantle, that whole situation and influence that whole situation to something else. So regardless of if he said it right or not, I still can choose my response. I still can make those assumptions for myself by checking my assumption says, even if he said that to me, even if he said, you piece of whatever, you POC this, you did, I could simply still say, I'm not making any qualms that it's not going to hurt. I'm not going to feel what I'm going to feel about it. But I could simply say, you know what? I just want you to know I do have a spot here with the building. I do have a fob to come into the building. If you would like to know specifically if this spot is registered to me, I think you have to take that up with the management company and not actually me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So regardless of how he asks it, I still can control that because I'm always concerned or curious, if we are sitting there waiting for people to ask it the right way or use the right words, then does that give me permission to go off when they don't?
But we do as a society. And I think actually that's what we're seeing. And so this is the thing for our listeners today, is actually about taking inspired actions with check your assumptions, right? And so actually, Kyle, you know me, I always like to look up a little bit of research or a little bit of...
I was just going to ask you, actually. I was going to say, what is the research on this? Is there any?
So actually, I was curious, why do we make assumptions? So actually, this is our brain's way of saving energy. We make assumptions. So if we made no assumptions, we would be exhausted all the time. So what happens is that we draw on our past experiences. And by doing that, and most of this happens subconsciously, we find patterns in how the world works, right? So somebody comes to you with a certain tone. If you've heard that tone 100 times before in your life, and it was always associated with some kind of a negative or positive outcome, you will likely, if you don't check your assumptions, assume that this is a negative or positive assumption. So when we, and like, this is what we do. Like, I have worked with over 2,000 clients, Kyle, in the last 8.5 years, you know this. And so much of what we do is about checking assumptions, right? And as a coach, I have come to learn to never assume, although we do. I mean, you have to get on with the day, right? But we do. It is about that. Try your best to never assume. And really, as you would remind me, it's not about not assuming. It's about checking the assumption. So basically what happens is when we encounter a seemingly new situation, we actually apply the patterns first. So basically this is talking about our biases or assumptions, right? We apply the patterns. So and we apply that to the new environment or the new circumstance or the new situation. So basically what this process does is it saves us energy of analyzing each situation completely. This comes from this specific definition comes from the arbingerinstitute.com. So this is why we do it. So to fight assumptions is actually not in your best interests, right? To not assume is not in your best interest. And there is this phrase, well, if you assume, that makes an ass out of you and me, right? And it's kind of this colloquialism. But actually that phrase is oversimplified because we're going to assume. The question is, do you take the pause or the step to check your assumptions? So now this is the question. How do our listeners take inspired action to check their assumptions? And I have an idea about this, but I'm curious to hear what you would say, Kyle.
You know what? I like that. I think just taking that pause, because sometimes we feel that we have to be automatic, right? And I think just taking that pause in that moment and say, listen, I also have an assumption that I can also assume to put at the other end by saying this person is maybe fearful, or this person is uncertain, right? And so maybe I need to defer back to, how do I want to respond to that in a disarming way? Because, they said, an eye for an eye is going to do what? Leave everyone blind. And at the end of the day, we don't. It's hard to fight water and fire. Like, it's just,
well, it's a win-lose situation, right?
Absolutely.
Like, it's a win-lose situation or a lose-lose situation. And actually what we want is a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
So
what do you think?
Yeah, so my approach to this would actually be approaching it with absolute curiosity. Meaning when I'm in the end, oh girl, you got to check yourself sometimes. Like it's okay, because we are imperfect human beings. You're going to have your initial assumption and reaction first. Right? Like, that's going to happen. If you grew up in a household where it was like reactions were quick and snappy and whatever,
exactly,
then you're going to have that original assumption first. Like, that's probably what's going to happen, right? But then the idea is to slow down. Like, it's okay. I have been in situations where I was terse with somebody and then a stranger. And then I actually went back and said, you know what? I'm not proud of how I handled myself because I didn't ask enough questions. I'm sorry. And they're like, no, like, honestly, it doesn't matter to me. And I'm like, no, but it matters to me and it bothers me. This is going to bother me. I need to let you know that I didn't respond in the way that I wanted to. And maybe what I needed to do was be curious. And I think that's the point. Like, if we had been curious in that situation with this guy, you could have put a smile on your face, right? You could have said, ask the questions. It's like, I can show you that I have a fob and, at the next door, right? Because how our building is set up, you need the same fob to get in anyway. I can show you that if you prefer. And at that point, he would have probably been like, whatever. And so unfortunately, the way that this circumstance lasted or ended is that there was a sour taste in your mouth and his mouth, And so,
yeah. And what's interesting is a week later, he tailgated me
into the building.
I was just like, right. And,
did you say anything? You should have said
because something. I was mindful, I could have done, which is, I think this is what people sometimes expect, right? Is I could have done what he did. And maybe no one would have blamed me. People are like, yeah, go ask him. But you know what? Again, back to that thing that we're saying is a win. That would be a win-lose situation. Me going up would have been punitive. Just like, where's your fob? Where's your proof? Right? And maybe in that moment, he realized, damn, look at me doing the exact same thing. And maybe he'll just walk away from it. Right.
Right. I think you should actually go find his vehicle and leave him a coffee gift card.
I know his vehicle. I don't know if he's getting no coffee gift card. I mean, what do you guys think? Should I go leave him a coffee gift card?
Yeah, what are the listeners think?
Why do I always have to go
Why
up?
not leave it on a high note? No,
why do I have to?
Why? Because that's the standard that you hold yourself to, right? Like,
That's true.
like
Yeah,
somebody
that's true.
has to be a hero in these situations, and maybe the hero moment is, for folks when they're out there doing this, is remaining curious, like actually asking yourself, why am I assuming that because this person's doing this or that? Like, we do it in our vehicles all the time. Check your assumptions in your vehicles. When someone cuts you off, our immediate reaction is to be ticked off. Like I have like the gentlest clients, Kyle. One of them was on the phone with me while she was driving, not for a session. I was just checking in, and she's like the gentlest, softest client. And all of a sudden she forgot she was on the phone with me. And she said, "Oh, come on, for F's sakes, you're effing kidding me. Get the F out of the way, you stupid a-hole." Except she was using the words. And I started laughing, and I'm like, I'll use a fake name. Jennifer, you're on the phone with me, right? And so it's like, it actually ended up being a great coaching opportunity, because it's like, what are you assuming is happening? Like, they are not doing this to destroy your day. So I think curiosity is the first thing. Asking yourself, why do you think they're doing that before we respond? The second thing I would say is make the opposite assumption. So especially in traffic, when you don't have the opportunity, make the assumption that they're rushing to the hospital. Make the assumption that they made an honest mistake, because I have yet to meet a single person who hasn't made a mistake driving, forgetting to signal, not seeing the vehicle when you're changing lanes, all of that stuff. So make the opposite assumption that it was just it was just a really simple error, or that maybe they're rushing to the hospital, maybe they have to go put their pet down, like, I don't know, right? But make the opposite assumption. So if you're going to make an assumption, why that assumption? Why the assumption that gets you angry? Choose the assumption that taps into your compassion or empathy. Imagine how different our world would be.
Totally. And again, don't miss my my suggestion too about the first thing is to pause, right? I think just take that pause and then become curious, then think about the opposite assumption. And if I could add 4, because we're overachievers here, if I could just add the 4th one is sometimes, depending on the situation, we may also inquire about the assumption, right? I could say to you, Christopher, what assumption are you making right now? Or I could say, Christopher, can I just share with you the assumption I have right now? Right? Because then it also furthers the conversation of being curious. So those are 4 things.
I totally agree with you. And Kyle, I think that's a challenge for us and our listeners, being imperfect human beings who want to take inspired action, is we want to keep checking that assumption. So to our listeners, we want to hear your stories. If you had to take imperfect, inspired action on checking your assumptions, what would you do today in the next 24 hours? Give us a story where you did this really well. Even telling us your story reinforces that behavioral patterning in your brain. So you'll start to think this way more and more. We want to hear your stories, folks. We're so excited. We're so excited to hear your stories. We want to learn more. And certainly I know lots of you will have comments for Kyle about that coffee cart and what he should do.
Guys.
If you're on my side, you're going to say he should put that coffee cart in with a little note that says, like in the guy's, wiper blade, saying, "Hey, a few weeks ago, I tailgated you in. You asked me a question. In hindsight, I realized that you were asking for the safety of the building, but the way I responded was probably not favorable. Here's a coffee on me in the coffee shop below the, in the bottom of the building here. Hope you have a great week." Girl, put that energy into the world. See?
Totally. Or for the other folks, it could be, no, he got what he deserved. I'm just saying. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
If you guys hate Kyle, it's okay, because I hate Kyle too. Okay, guys. Can't wait to see you all next week.
See you next week.
It's our goal to build a global community of inspired action takers. And we can only do that with your help. So if you love inspired action, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting app and share us on your socials. You've heard from us. Now we want to hear from you. Go to inspiredactionpodcast.ca and tell us, what is the inspired action you took this week? Next week on Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans.
I did manage to call her a fucking bitch later, and
Wait, can you say that?